This is the stairs to the basement, and again you can see all the plaster has been removed. Plaster was quite heavy. Most of the first floor was the plaster had been demolished when I purchased the house, and I've since removed what remained, which was only about a couple of rooms worth. And yet the couple of rooms worth was probably 4,000 pounds of plaster. So I have to think that the entire house, the weight of the plaster could have been in the neighborhood of 15,000 pounds, or more than 7 tons of plaster on the walls and the ceilings. So we're here in the basement, and this is unusual because this is the only house in the neighborhood with a basement. And what you can see is the brick which holds up the sills of the house, and the block are about a 2 feet difference in depth from where I'm standing. So what that probably means is that this basement was dug out subsequent to the house's construction. And I did find a little artifact that would indicate that that's the case, and that's over here. As you can see, the basement is pretty dry. Once I corrected the issue with the downspouts at the corners of the porch and the house, any water that was coming in no longer comes in from the surface. And the only spot that when it rains I have a little trouble with is right down here at the joint of the wall and the floor. And I do get a little water that comes in there. I'll address that later. But as I say, I believe the basement was dug out, but I didn't know when until I did some cleanup, and I found this in the concrete, November 4th, 1919. So I'm fairly satisfied that this is good evidence that the basement was dug out in 1919, which was 29 years after the house was built and 103 years ago. The block wall obviously has effervesced due to moisture penetration, but not too badly. And I believe this to be a concrete block as opposed to a cinder block, where it has spalled a little bit. You can see that it's pretty dense. It really doesn't look like a cinder block. So that's good if it is concrete block, because concrete block is denser and can hold a heck of a lot more weight than a cinder block. Although this is not holding any weight anywhere except this one wall here, where I don't have the offset. So this block wall is directly beneath the exterior wall here. So the house sits on brick piers, and these here in the corner we've got a brick pier. The brick pier is the depth of 2 bricks, which is about 8 inches. Here is another small pier. Here's an intermediate pier, and then another pier in the corner. So every 8 feet or so there's a pier, and on top of the pier we have a sill. And so the sill is resting on the piers, the single layer of brick, and here's a pier here. You can see that's double thickness. The span between piers is filled in by a single layer of brick, and you can see that generally it's just a running bond, so not extremely strong. And this is pretty much just infill, because even though the sill is sitting on this, this doesn't provide much in the way of structural support. Again, the house is in plan a T shape, and this section here is the upright of the T. And I'm going to back up and try not to injure myself. And then this section here is the crossbar of the T. So again, pier in the corner, and intermediate pier, and then another pier in the corner there. And again, we have the block wall, which is about 2 feet inboard of the exterior. So unfortunately, the block wall doesn't provide any structural support for the house, other than the fact that at one point when the wall was built, a small section of 4x4 was used to give a little extra support to this beam. Now, because this basement was dug out, there had to be some provisions made for where do the beams go, where do they get supported, how was it originally. I really can't determine that precisely. But if this basement was dug out, imagine the weight of the two chimneys having to be supported while they were undermined so that they could excavate and then build up from a footer using a block to then support the weight of all those bricks going up to a height of almost 30 feet. Actually, probably a little bit more because the chimneys penetrate the roof. Actually, one of them does not anymore. One of them does, and I'm going to leave that even though it will be non-functioning. So there are a couple of small defects here. This beam right here, which runs, it's about 34 feet long, except they couldn't get a beam that long, so they have a joint here. This joint is called a scarf joint, and you can see right there where the right part of this beam overlaps the left part of the beam, and then there's a post underneath supporting it. So while lumber was, I guess, relatively inexpensive back then, you couldn't find a piece of wood that was that long for a reasonable price. So they had to use two pieces, and they did what they call a scarf joint, and then supported it here. So this beam to the left and to the right extends to the piers to form the, if you will, the bottom portion or the front portion of the crossbar of the T section. So there was an oil-fired boiler right here. I've removed that. I've removed all the plumbing in the house except that piece of cast iron waste line that you saw. This is an oil tank here, obviously, and it's going to get drained, and then it's going to get carted out of here. So that is, my desire is not to use a fossil fuel for a heating source going forward on a permanent basis. So what do we have here? Here we had the sewer line exit. I've got a plug in it now. Again, it looks like it was after the initial construction of the house, theorizing that the house was not plumbed originally, did not have sewer or running water in 1890. I'm not sure when that was added. At some point, closer to our point in time, some PVC was installed. This is the main entrance for the water, and you can see that that's PVC as well. That'll get replaced. This electrical panel is energized, so I was able to wire up lights and an outlet or two here in the basement. That'll get replaced because it's corroded. It's obviously missing a whole lot of breakers, and so that'll be part of the renovation restoration. The window well windows are kind of different. This is one after I did some work on it because here on the other window well, you can see that for whatever reason, what's outside of the glass is a chunk of concrete that was poured in place. I'm not sure why they did that. I guess they thought the window wells, they were leaking, and perhaps this was their best solution, was to just try to bring the level of the grade of the window well up to the grade of the soil. But it really wasn't a good solution. This is a mess, and this was leaking, but doesn't seem to be leaking anymore. However, I'm going to, as I've done this, is to correct it so that you can see the full amount of light coming through the glass, and I've put a new frame around it as well. That was a half a day's work to get the old concrete piece out, which probably weighed a couple 100 pounds, and the adjacent stone, digging out, putting in a new galvanized window well, and then a cover. I'll show you that on the outside. But that's the basement, and as I say, it's pretty dry. My future plans for the basement are to get rid of everything else, sandblast the masonry, and then I'll pour a self-leveling floor on top of this, and then it'll be a ceramic tile. And I will, if I am so inclined, probably paint the wood, the joists, white, just to increase the illumination of space. Oil tank will go out and new stairs will be installed.